First of all, welcome everybody. Let's give it up for the conference organizers for putting this wonderful morning and wonderful day together. And I'm going to put up today's debate statement. And that statement is, philanthropy has a leadership role to play in social change movement. And text in your answers yes or no. I'll give you guys a second to do that. All right, and over the course of this next hour, the debate teams are going to do their best to persuade your vote. We're going to take another vote at the end of this debate, so you can see it's still moving, those numbers. The team, and this is important, I want you guys to listen to this, the team that gains the most votes is the team that is going to be declared the winner. So it's actually not where you started, it's which team, these two people on either side of me, actually change the most minds, and that's what we're going to be evaluating them on. So continue to show them love this morning with your flags, your maracas, your signs. We will have time to take questions from the audience after the opening statement. So you're going to see some note cards on your tables. Please write questions on those cards, and you can put them up. Our volunteers will come around and take your questions so we can have you interact with the debaters here. All right, so without further ado, let's bring up our first debater. You guys ready? Yeah? All right, I can't hear you. Our first debater representing yes is Peter Long. Peter, please come to the podium. Give me back my maraca. I'm very judgmental, and this is how you'll know. And make your opening statement. Give him a round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to start just with a few thank yous. Thanks to NCG for hosting the conference, but for asking this question, because this is actually how social change begins, when we in philanthropy ask questions like this and actually debate them. So it's one of our first roles is actually to begin to ask the question of, do we need social change and what role should we play? So thank you, NCG, for teeing up this conversation. And thank you to our opponents, Cedric and Carly, because I think we might disagree on a few things this morning, but we fundamentally agree that we need social change in our country. I think we fundamentally agree on some of the solutions. We may disagree on how we get there, but I want to, and also recognize your contributions every day to making that happen. So I just want to recognize you and welcome you. And to the audience, thank you for the field at large for what you do every day to improve people's lives. So for the last 9 years, I've had the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of Blue Shield of California Foundation. And our mission, thank you, Blue Shield's in the house. Our mission is to build lasting and equitable solutions to make California healthy, the healthiest state, and end domestic violence. So embedded in that mission is social change, right? So you don't end domestic violence and make California the healthiest state without social change. So every day, we as a foundation have to ask ourselves, what role do we play in seeding and supporting social change movements? And I think it's a question that all of us as foundations organizationally and as individuals ask ourselves every day, what is our role? As I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think we'll get a lot of disagreement that we need profound social change in our country at this time. Inequality is baked into nearly every one of our systems, from education to healthcare, to economic immobility in our society, to public safety, to our immigration system. Many of our current societal structures and policies actually are widening the gaps that some of our philanthropies are seeking to address. So I hope that we don't have an argument about whether we need social change in this country and whether it will take a movement to do it. I think that part we should stipulate is clear, and the question is then, what is our role? If I could go back several hundred years and redraw the entire American experiment to embody its noblest sentiments about equality of opportunities for all people, of course I would. I think each of us would do that. Benjamin Franklin described the best of American ideals. The noblest question in the world is, what good may I do in it? Unfortunately, the actual history of the United States is somewhat different. From the outset, we have had a limited social contract. It is built into our governing philosophy, as are racism, sexism, and many forms of bias and inequity. there has been and continues to be an expectation that the private sector will play a vital role in deciding and implementing large pieces of our social contract. 2 centuries later, we see poor outcomes across multiple domains. We see the monetization of our well-being within healthcare, within education, and our criminal justice system. Simultaneously, U.S. law created entities such as foundations through tax policy and other regulatory changes. And as a result, foundations and philanthropy have accumulated significant wealth and power. The choice today is, how do we use that power? I see there are 3 fundamental choices in front of us. The first is to embrace the status quo and do nothing. To me, that is morally unjustified. The second is we can ameliorate the symptoms. We can use our power to ameliorate the symptoms and negative effects on individuals, families, and communities produced by the status quo. That is necessary and not sufficient. Or we can use our power to support meaningful social change movements to address the root causes of inequity and oppression and co-design a different and better future. This is the only choice as I see it. I know there's some questions about, is philanthropy bold enough to lead, and philanthropy benefited from the status quo, and I think those are 2 really valid arguments. The question is, I think we have done more harm than good. We have our blind spots. We have places where we haven't always lived up. But I think you'll hear from Fatima in a minute that there are many examples where foundations have led. The sum of our argument is this, the crux of our argument. Philanthropy can lead social change movements. It has led social change movements. It should lead them in the future. The question is, how should we lead? Not whether we should lead, it is how should we lead. And my colleague Fatima will take that part and walk us through, when we decide to lead, how do we lead well? Thank you.
All right. Next, representing Team No is Cedric Brown. Please come to the podium.
Good morning. That was pretty good. I'm from a call and response tradition, so the response back is important. Good morning. Good morning. Well, all right. Thank you to NCG, and thank you to Peter for such a gracious opening to this great debate. DACA dreamers, Standing Rock, Black Lives Matter, Me Too. Great social change movements are made of, by, and for the people who are most fed up. Such movements don't originate with us funders or emanate from us funders, and therefore it would be irresponsible of us funders to deem ourselves as architects and activist leaders of any social change movement. Anand Giridharadas, the author of the wildly popular New York Times bestseller, Winners Take All, the elite charade of changing the world, argues that, much like Peter just did, philanthropy He argues that philanthropy and social entrepreneurship are actually reinforcing the status quo and amplifying the inequality that we are trying to take down. Think about this. What is the 5% payout threshold really about? What is the notion of perpetuity really about? And given that government already operates at the vaunted scale that we keep reaching for and pushing our grant recipient partners toward, why don't wealthy benefactors just pay more taxes and the government could do its job? This is why frontline movement leadership can't come from us, because our sector is the pretty, redemptive face of exploitation. See, philanthropy is built on business, and business is about market exploitation. It is not about social change. It is not about positive social impact. It is not about restructuring social systems to work for the masses. Because although we may see ourselves as latter-day Robin Hoods, us, bridging the gap between the haves and the have-nots, enabling critically needed dollars to be invested in critically needed advocacy and research and direct service work, organized philanthropy is still too finely attuned to the whims, wiles, and wants of the 1%, only some of whom are progressive. And as we know from wrestling with fiscally responsible but equity-reluctant trustees, the buck and the potential for financing revolutionary change stops with them in this current system. But what about us in this room? We have values, visions, and voices that could individually and collectively lend themselves to leadership. Where does Carly's conscience, Peter's poise, and Fatima's finesse fit into the picture? I say that organized philanthropy only has the obligation to support, advise, and connect. Could one consider that to be a leadership role? Perhaps, in the background. So in that regard, I'm going to suggest that NO is actually an acronym for not only. Such leadership indicates not out in front, but with, alongside, and in response to. No absolutely means no in a physical consensual context, but here I'm going to suggest that NO is actually an acronym for never only. I have 1 minute. What have we learned from years of working together across communities and coalitions, learning from turning ideas into initiatives and learn from obtaining opportune objectives for optimal outcomes? That such work cannot come from us funders. It's never only about us, and we should use our positional power and social capital to center the people most directly affected by the issues at play. Let's take inspiration today from my Afro-punk, cisgen brethren, and gender non-conforming kinfolk, and remember that no is a powerful means to propel us into social change. No sexism, no racism, no ableism, no homophobia, no fatphobia, no transphobia, no hatefulness in general. No gives us the power just by the way we conduct ourselves, the lines that we draw in the sand, and the way that we take a stand to enact our vision, values, and voices in our work every day, especially when speaking truth to power. No is a reminder that social change movements are never only about one leader, but about all of us. From the fed up and broke to the well-fed and woke, No reminds us to take a stand and outstretch our hands because it's never about us. No.
Wow. That was pretty good, gentlemen. Provocative. And I went to business school. I'm a rare breed of journalist who did that, so that PowerPoint really spoke to me. Okay. Well, that completes round one of our debate. Let's bring on the women for round two. Again, a reminder, please write your questions on those note cards on your tables. Hold them up so that a volunteer can come by. All right, without further ado, Fatima Angeles from Team Yes, please make your statement.
Hello and good morning. I just want to say that I think Cedric made the case for why all of you are here. You have seen what needs to change. You all cheered for what needs to change. Where do you think that change is going to come from? Who's going to lead it? It's everybody here. Let's go. Of course, philanthropy has a role to play, but it has to be the right place at the table and the right kind of leadership. No single organization, not one person, not one sector makes a social movement. And my teammate Peter, in the yellow, in his opening remarks, why it's a missed opportunity when philanthropy doesn't take a place at the table. How can philanthropy lead? We can lead by following the principles of servant leadership. What are those principles? It's by listening, it's with empathy, it's with stewardship, it's by helping build community, it's having a commitment to growth. We are at the table to be in service with and for those people who are affected by injustice and inequities. and in service to the organizations on the ground who are fighting every day for better life outcomes and for justice. Here's what we bring to the fight. We bring money, we bring capital. Movements need resources, it needs financing. Philanthropy has money to deploy in ways that government and businesses aren't able to mobilize. We have our expertise. Look at our field. Look at how it has changed over time and how it has evolved. It has taken a while, it's taken deliberate action. But our sector is more diverse than ever. We have work to do. But there has work that has been done, and we are more diverse than ever. We come from diverse backgrounds. People in philanthropy right now have come from community, have come from policy, academia, government, business, all working together, bringing skills, experience, networks to philanthropy, to our collective work. We have our influence. We can catch the attention of certain audiences that perhaps are more inclined to tune out or ignore voices calling for change. We use our voice, our networks, to gain footholds, to crack open doors, and we can help hold those doors open for our partners. And sometimes we bring our shield to the fight. We can absorb grenades lobbed by our opponents and create the space for others to continue the work. We need to know our tools and know how to wield it well so that we can lead for change. And there's proof right here in this room that we can be effective leaders in social change movements. Haas Jr., where are you? In 2001, the Haas Jr. Fund became the first foundation to embrace marriage equality as a major priority. They created alliances, coalitions, they funded various organizations, including 4 national legal groups for the LGBTQ community, whose litigation resulted in the Supreme Court ruling for marriage equality. There are other examples. In the civil rights movement, for example, though many foundations steered clear, certain funders played key important roles in leading change. The New World Foundation, the Field Foundation, the Sturgeon Family Foundation, the Taconic Foundation all funded SNCC to coordinate strategy, to train movement leaders, including Rosa Parks, Fannie Lou Hamer, and John Lewis. And these funders convened other funders to pour more resources into the fight. Another example, Rockefeller and Ford Foundations helped move the Green Revolution, dramatically altering the quality of life for millions of people around the world, ensuring food security, including the Philippines, where I come from. And most recently, Prop 47. 6 major foundations led the way: Rosenberg, Open Society Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Endowment, California Endowment, where are you? Atlantic Philanthropies, and the Tides Foundation spent, they're not here, 2 years injecting money into a constellation of nonprofits to flex their muscles that paved the way to make Prop 47 a reality. And philanthropy has a way of getting in certain issues on the map using voice and political power where others could not. In the mid-'80s, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation dedicated $17 million for the fight against AIDS when government wouldn't step up. Finally, vote yes. I'm done.
The straight up pandering for votes is a nice touch. I like that. That's brave. Very nice, very nice. All right, last but certainly not least, representing No, Carly Hare, who has been feverishly taking notes. Come on up. Give her a hand.
Noah Tatasa Carly Hare Tatasada Kida Huda Chadix Pani Yankton. Thank you for having me here today with these great colleagues on this wonderful question and challenge we all have to address. Does philanthropy have a leadership role to play in social change movements? Rakira Huda Chadix is my Pawnee name, and that means kind leader of men. How are we shifting this work? What is the role that we have to play in moving this work? I want to honor Peter's points. They were apt and aspirational. I want to acknowledge that Fatima was fierce with her faith in what our philanthropic future could and should be. I want to acknowledge Cedric's sermon. that challenge and encourages us that philanthropy's role isn't in the front of social movements, but it is alongside, not only and never only. We still hold that we cannot hold a leadership role in these movements. And I just want to repeat, not only and never only is our role in this work. When we look at the work in the redemptive mirror, to challenge who we are and what we are, we have to look at the structural and functional challenges that our institutions create. It can take up to a year from introduction to proposal processing. How can we lead movements when our processes are so thick and heavy that don't move money into communities when they need it? We are also too risk adverse to react and respond to the needs as they're happening. We know best practice says general operating grants from our partners in the field, like Grantmakers for Effective Organizations, NCRP, and other change partner members, reinforce that these general operating grants, discretionary dollars people can use and activate, aren't readily made. We still are funding programs, we still are funding strategy, and we are too often funding our own initiatives in moving this work. When we move and think about this significant change, that puts us in the place of not only, but alongside. We also need to get out of our comfort places. We lean away from advocacy and organizing often, and we fund around the edges of root causes. We still fund in what is the traditional Rockefeller call around this charity model. We aren't, as a collective field, funding social change and social justice. I do want to acknowledge that historically there have been players that have stepped up to the field, and we heard from our colleagues about work from Field and New Foundation and Stern and Family and Tectonic around the civil rights movements. And they did gather funders, but where were the other 10,000 funders at the time? How are we moving those resources, and what does that look like? Even if we look at our more modern history, in the wake of the murder of unarmed Black men and boys and the growth of Black Lives Matter, how many foundations have responded to Black social change? How many foundations are putting money into leaders' hands? How many funders supported organizing for the Equal Rights Act for the last 45 years? It's been in process. How many funders are currently investing in organizing and education initiatives and informing our communities about the Equality Act that's on the plate right now for consideration? In the rise of Me Too and the missing and murdered Indigenous women, how many foundations are shifting their investments to women of color-led efforts? When they turn the hoses on those water protectors, how many of us funders were standing arm in arm with those organizations? And when they came for the immigrants, how many of us were there to stand in the way? But don't lose hope. We heard number stories there. We are moving money, we are moving resources, and there are so many examples of folks that are doing it not only and not alone, but alongside. And that's where we feel that no is the answer to this session. We cannot do it not only, but alongside. And if we want to really take a significant look at the field and the work we've done, we can say that we've actually moved resources for social change in significant ways. We can look at the conservative funding movement over the last 20 years. We can look at the money that's been moved into initiatives that's challenged the work. We can look at anti-hate, anti-immigrant, anti-lesbian, anti-LGBTQ work from foundations, from organized philanthropy, from donor-advised funds that is actively building strategy and moving social change issues. We need to be that voice as progressively, as aggressively, and alongside. So not only, and never alone, and vote no.
All right, well, thank you for that very thoughtful argument to both of you. All right, what we're going to do now is toss it out to all of you. We want to hear your thoughts, we want to hear your questions, and we, again, we've been asking you to put your questions down on note cards, and I think we already have a couple. All right, let's start with one that is addressed to both sides. So pick converse amongst yourselves when you hear the question and decide who's going to who's in the hot seat. Philanthropy has been critiqued lately as perpetuating inequality and colonization. How might philanthropy use its resources to maximize shifts in power? We'll start with the yes team. You guys need a minute?
Nope.
All right, they're ready.
Yes.
Is this on? Yeah. All right. Yes, team. You know, a lot of what the opposing side listed out are well-deserved critiques of our field. We know that. We've read the books. We come to conferences like this to self-flagellate. But what we need to do is to turn it around. We know the solutions. We know how we need to act. And we wouldn't be here if we didn't think we can be partners for change. Having said that, yes, we can be part of the status quo and we can perpetuate inequities. For our work, our collective work, and for the work that I see across here, I think part of the solution is about advocacy. It's supporting civic engagement. It's supporting leadership development, and moving capital and moving power to communities that are most affected. It's changing how we roll. It's putting ego aside. And it's really looking at the recommendations of the books that have just been published and not saying, oh, it's that foundation. It's this foundation. We have the recipe for what we need to do to be better. Let's go ahead and have a bake-off. And make the best cake we can. Yes!
I think our colleagues shared some critical points along why we could say yes, but they also brought up some very substantial points about why we should say no, and about how the field itself is prepared or not prepared. Peter shared that we have baked into our organizations, we have racism, patriarchy. We have inequalities baked into this because we are built on a system of a white dominant culture that is not connected to our organizations and our communities in a specific way. And we heard about the active recruitment of folks into the field to make these institutions be able to shift and change. But that active recruitment has presented challenges. Have we done the extensive culture and climate shift we need to work within our institutions to actually create environments where people thrive? If we are encouraging and engaging activists to join us in this fight, to be part of the institutions, to shift the power and stand in places of power, how are we supporting them? We know too often people are welcomed in and then they are left alone. They are held in their roles and they are struggling to survive on a daily basis. And we know that that means that folks are navigating trauma in institutions on a daily frame. And it's not an old conversation. While this work has been around for 50 plus years, whether that's through the creation of affinity groups, community organizing, internal of institutions, we know even in the last year, these issues are still raising themselves. Through the Diversity and Philanthropy, Philanthropic Professionals Report, we know a high number of individuals are still in the closet that are LGBTQ about their identities within their institutions, even in progressive social justice framed and equity aligned foundations. We know through EPIP's Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy's Dissonance and Disconnects report that folks don't feel the opportunity to invest in themselves, to move through the ladders of the institutions and feel supported in that work. We know through the Association of Black Foundations exit interview that people are leaving. Folks of color are in it and getting burnt and leaving. We know through the Equity in the Center and their new Wake to Woke to Work models that this work exists, there is process to work through. We are choosing either not to actively move through it, or we are choosing to be barriers in our own way. So once again, we can't do this alone. We need to engage our community into it. They need to lead, so not only and never only.
All right. Thank you for that question. Remember, we have these signs at your tables. Hold them up, show your love for the two teams. And we're going to try to get through these questions a little bit quicker because we're actually getting a lot of them. So thank you for this. I just also really quickly want to point out that the No team made their own T-shirts. Okay? But they brought their own. I think they might not have done them themselves. I don't know. It's not irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
Stores.
Okay, next question. Okay, quick. What structurally needs to change within foundations in order to be effective social change agents? Do you guys want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
What structurally needs to change? It's fitting that we're sitting here on the periphery of Silicon Valley. We need to ask ourselves the question about how we can disrupt philanthropy, how our sector needs to fundamentally shift its practices. Some of these things were outlined by my debate partner, Carly. We need to look at how we can break down, as I questioned earlier, this 95% investment threshold where most of the money is actually being held and not being put into the social change movements, and in fact, often is invested in places that are causing the harm that the 5% is trying to fight. So by placing money in the hands of more directly in the hands of community, by trying to figure out community grant-making processes, by working really closely with trustees who are coming from communities, who understand the challenges of communities, and who are not trying to maintain the kind of economic apartheid that we see in so many of our institutions on the boards of trustees, as well as even on staff. So I think that we can turn the mirror toward ourselves. We can incite a social change movement amongst us as philanthropic organizations, while we're also trying to fight and work to invest in other orgs.
I actually agree with most of that, in a sense, because I think we're asking about what needs to change in order to lead. But I would start at the top, leadership. If we are going to lead in an authentic and effective way, our leadership of our organizations has to reflect the communities, has to have lived experience, and not in a small, individual way and putting one or two folks on boards. We did a work with NCG last year with Daylight, and we did about systemic income inequality and racial inequality in the Bay Area. And we mapped out where foundations are part of the problem. And part of that is around the tepidness and timidness of our leadership and our inability to actually dive in and go for full change and give up control. So I'd start at the top in terms of our boards and our leadership, that they truly are willing to give up control. And I would say our mantra should be, anytime we find ourselves doing something to and for people, we should stop. And we should only do things with people. And that's a different no than no. That's a yes with. Not a no, not only, not ever.
That's
so I'm going to take their term and say
only,
yes with.
never only.
All right, next question. What are some good resources for making the change to general operating support, particularly? Can you guys pick up your handwriting game a little bit? I'm kidding. Particularly for educating the board and using an incremental change approach. And I was totally kidding about the handwriting. I can totally read this. Yes, team.
We've been doing and making grants using general operating support, core support for a really long time. It is not hard to do, and it is strategic. Let's get a yes. We do that because we can only achieve our mission when nonprofit organizations are at its best. And we know that flexible dollars, core support, help them meet their mission. So that's not rocket science. Tools that can make that happen, and we do this all the time. Our CEOs do this all the time. Our CEO can talk to your board. Our board members can talk to your board to make it less mysterious, to make it less risky. And we can even partner in staff to staff to walk you through processes. We are happy that more and more organizations, more and more foundations are doing it, stumped as to why it's still so hard to get multi-year core support for organizations that are amazing. It's not risky, and it's not strategic. So I'm not sure what we're afraid of when organizations that we admire, leaders that we follow, are telling us that that's what they need. Let's give it to them.
Give it to them. I agree. What I want to ask, though, is when challenging boards, what lies in the assumption that organizations can't handle general operating support? How do we unpack that assumption that our nonprofit colleagues, brothers, sisters, et cetera, cannot handle a lump sum of money in order to have their organizations flourish to get done the kind of work that they need to get done? So is this a brain thing? Is this a mental block? Or is this really grounded in some kind of fiscal reality? I will provide for you the example of startup culture. Not a great culture to emulate all across the board, but in this respect, when startups go out and raise a fund, they make the case to the VCs, this is all that we're trying to do in this phase of work. We need this amount of money to get all of this done, and that's what they get. So if we can draw that example from startup culture and adapt it to nonprofit culture in pursuit of general operating support, perhaps we will see a more powerful funding model.
Okay, this is for the yes team. What does the yes team have to say in response to Cedric's critique about the limitation of and resistance to the 5% payout rule?
Just spend more money. I mean, there's nothing stopping us. At Blue Shield, we spent 90% of our money, 98% every year, every minute of every day was thinking about how do you bring about change and do something meaningful with the resources. So I would argue every minute we're spending kind of in perpetuity, we're saying to the folks who are alive today with us, you're less important than perpetuity. So there is no prohibition about spending more money, right? So just spend the money, put it to good use, think about what the actual work and the lives that we're supporting and others that we're supporting to do the work, and stop letting us, I would say my close, I'll give you a preview of my close. That's an us problem. We've got to solve the us problems before we leave, and I think Carly did a great job of laying them out. The 5% is an us problem. Yes, it's a government setting the floor way too low. Why do we accept that floor? That's an us problem.
All right. So we're going to get to one more question, but I hope that for those of you who didn't get your questions asked, you'll approach our panelists here, our debaters later, because there's some really interesting conversation happening. Let's end big picture, and we've kind of touched a little bit on this, but let's dig deeper. Can you all speak to how the inherent power dynamics get in the way of philanthropy's ability to lead when the root of these issues is about power, subordination, and domination? Why don't we start with you guys over here?
I don't want the power.
I think a lot of what's happening to philanthropy, and we clap when people critique us and self-flagellation again, because we know it's true. And I think a lot of the cheers that went to the no side, I think is because we are uncomfortable with our own power. We feel guilty having it. We don't have the tools to use it. And we are afraid of what other folks might think when we wield that power. To use power well, and we learned this from our advocates, and we learned this from leaders on the ground, they know how to wield that power. They know how to leverage it. They know how to get more of it. Philanthropy, we're lazy about it. We have an uncomfortable relationship with it. In particular, when people of color end up working in philanthropy, you struggle with it. You want to be liked by your grantees. They don't need us to like them. They need us to wield our power to open doors that they can't open. They need us to invest in them wisely. That's power. It is our responsibility to know how to do that well. And we don't do that well. We think it's not me. We think it's that foundation over there. And so I think we start with us. And it's a privilege that we need to take care of. And we need to really hold hands, own it, recognize it, use it, and use it in service. This is a crazy environment right now. We have families that are living out unsheltered. People are hiding from the law for just being here. We don't have time to be ambivalent about the power we have. Let's own it, let's use it, and let's use it in service.
Do we, however, feel guilty enough? Do we feel guilty enough to move money, to address power, to really have a collective conversation in the field about what that means, to develop strategy and really dive into where did our money come from? On whose backs? On whose lands? Where does this resource come? How do we build this? What is it, these institutions we've created? And have we collectively done the exploration we need to effectively lead and share power? We individually and institutionally all carry bias with us in every single day. We choose to have bigoted practice and to take bigoted actions in our work. And we choose to reinforce those institutions and those institution policies and practices on a daily basis.
We're almost to the end now. Okay, it's time for each debater to provide a closing statement. Debaters will each get 2 minutes. Cedric. This is your final chance to win the audience vote, and let's kick things off with Team Yes, Fatima. You're up.
Yeah, switch your order.
All right, here we go, 2 minutes. As we've discussed, philanthropy has access to tremendous resources, and I believe that money can be like medicine. It can ease pain, it can heal when you go to the place where it hurts the most, if it's handled well. There's huge responsibility in being a servant leader. I'm proud to be part of a foundation that is committed to exercising its voice and committing its dollars to advancing equity, to healing, and to communities in California. We are graced and humbled by the work of our partners, and we do our work in service to them and to future generations. So here's what I will end with. Yes, we can be better. Yes, we know what we need to do. Yes, we can rise to the challenge. Yes, we are powerful partners for change. Yes, we can put ego aside when we choose to, and we should. And yes, we can lead with humility and in service. Vote yes! Woo!
We have all been called and inspired to think about how we move this work forward today. We have heard examples of where we can hold and own and be in leadership places together. And we have heard examples of how we can step aside, move along, and be strategic in that place. It is not a zero-sum game, even though we want to win. But the fact that you're here in this conversation, the fact that you're ready to explore this, the fact that everyone here is engaged is really important to this work. We can collectively move this, not only never alone and in partnership and collaboration, have deep conversations, be vulnerable and bold and courageous in this work, and be the servant leaders and the active partners and community members we need to be. And with that, I will tell you to vote no, and I will share the rest of my time with our closing comment.
All right. Great. I think we've all won today, and I think we've demonstrated the role of philanthropy. One of our roles is that we can actually talk about things. This is not abstract. This is not about them. This is not about some institution. This is about every one of us making a choice. So it's not a choice. This is not an abstract conversation. It's not theoretical. I agree with Carly. This is a choice we make today and every day. And I would say, I'm learning from Cedric. I have an acronym, YES. You need to solve the us problems. We cannot lead if we are not ready to lead. So your job, yes, why? You need to solve the us problems around leadership, around core support, around the way there are institutions. We work in them, we own them. Second, E, everybody is in this together. We don't stop being people. I believe in Ubuntu, right? People are people through other people. We do not stop being people because we happen to work in a foundation. Everybody is in this together. So it is in some sense an abstract conversation of whether we lead because we sit in a particular institution. It is a personal decision that everyone must make every day. And I would say to you, stop waiting and start being the change that you want to see in the world. That's the only option. Thank you.
Leadership is influencing people to make up their own acronyms. So I'll just finish what I was cut off from saying before. No is a reminder that social change movements are never only about one leader, but about all of us, from the fed up and broke to the well-fed and woke. No reminds us to take a stand and outstretch our hands because it's not only about us, never only us, not only us, never only, not only, N-O. Now the beauty here is that the shades of no and yes, blue and yellow rather, combine to make green, the color of life and healing. So let's remember that as we proceed. But today, vote no.
All right, thank you to all of our debaters. Let's see now. I mean, you guys have been cheering, but now is decision time. Let's see if you've been able to convince the audience. Once again, I invite you to pull out your phones. It's time for that final vote, and the slide instructions are up there if you've forgotten. So I'll just remind you again, the winning team is the one that gets the most. And give you guys a second.
Stop talking, you guys. We're going to end the field right here. You're too persuasive.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
All right, so it looks like we're settling in somewhere around 40% yes and 57%. Oh!
They won.
I'm going to give this a second.
Let's go! Woo! Let's go! Come on!
Oh my God. All right, conference over. That's it.
All right, it looks like we're almost even. 47% yes, 54% no. Now, is there another slide, organizers, that I need to read here? Do we know who won? Who won?
No.
No one. Okay, no one. Let's give No a hand. And let's also give Yes a hand. You guys made some very provocative and thoughtful arguments. I thank you both. Winning isn't everything. Don't forget that. Can we do another poll for who's having a good morning? Because that last one really bruised my ego. Is that possible? No? Okay. All right, guys, thank you so much. This concludes another great, thought-provoking, great debate. You guys were awesome.